They found us on the edge of nothing, a pale blue dot trembling in the shadow of dying stars. A race barely past the infancy of fusion, still fumbling with fire like cavemen under neon skies. The Galactic Concord, 1,000 civilizations woven into an empire of intellect and arrogance, watched Earth with mild amusement, anthropological curiosity at best, and disdainful pity at worst. Their emissary, a being of crystalline neural strata and a voice like chimes cracking ice, stood before the United Earth Assembly and called us temporal infants, declaring that humanity was to be observed but never engaged, protected but never welcomed. We were primitive, they said, emotionally erratic, biologically unsound, strategically chaotic. And yet, beneath the surface of that fractured unity they mocked, within our fever dreams and haunted histories, something older than war and deeper than science stirred. We listened, nodded, accepted their judgments, and quietly began to burn. Not with anger, but with hunger. A hunger that stretched beyond galaxies and into the marrow of time itself. While the aliens scoffed, we explored, not space, but time. And not with machines, not at first, with thought, with mathematics twisted into philosophy and emotions harnessed as equations of chaos. The Temporal Displacement Initiative was mocked by our own kind too, until the first paradox engine sputtered in a forgotten bunker beneath Antarctic ice, powered by nothing but grief and memory. Commander Ava Ryin was the first to witness it, her fingers trembling as she watched her daughter, long dead from radiation poisoning, flicker back into existence for 0.72 seconds. She screamed, not in horror, but in promise. "She's not gone," Ava whispered. "She's just misplaced in time." That day, humanity changed. We didn't chase the stars like the Concorde expected. We turned inward, backward, forward, slipping threads through the tapestry of cause and consequence. We learned to listen to silence, to trace regret like gravity, to map trauma like a navigational grid. The aliens never saw it coming. They had technology, we had trauma. They had loss, we had loss, as it turns out, is a more potent fuel than antimatter. One by one, people vanished. Brilliant minds, physicists, poets, soldiers, disappearing off the face of the earth, only to reappear months later with haunted eyes and impossible knowledge etched into their skin like scars. We weren't building ships, we were building narratives, collapsing lifelines, rewriting probabilities. And when the Concorde sent a warning probe to orbit Earth, it shattered in mid-transmission, caught in a recursive timefold that looped its message into an endless scream. Temporal interference detected, human anomaly. Anomalous? Anomalous. They finally noticed, but it was too late, because by then we weren't asking for a seat at their table. We were building our own. Outside of time, beyond causality. We had discovered something they couldn't comprehend. How to weaponize heartbreak. How to turn mourning into momentum. And as Ava stood before the cracked temporal gateway, watching timelines swirl like galaxies in a blender, she muttered the words that would become legend. They called us primitive, but grief taught us more than peace ever could. Then she stepped through, into the past, the future, and the war that would break the stars. The Concorde's central AI, a construct older than most suns, blinked in confusion as Ava's name appeared in their historical archives. 3,000 years ago. The chapter closes not with a bang, but with a ripple. One woman, lost in time, already rewriting the fate of galaxies before the enemy even knows war has begun. Ava Ryin emerged into the past like a splinter of unresolved grief hurled backward through the universe's aching memory. Her body disoriented, but her purpose crystalline. Earth must survive, not by submission, but by subversion. The year was unknowable, ancient by every standard, predating even the formation of the Concorde's earliest seed civilizations. Around her, the stars pulsed in unfamiliar constellations, and massive dormant machines slept under oceans of molten glass and skies that bled radiation like rain. She wasn't alone. Others had come through, silent operatives from the initiative, temporal pilgrims chosen for their capacity to endure paradox. Each marked by the scars of a different loss, each armed with fragments of a plan too dangerous to write down. They spread across millennia like spores, embedding themselves in ancient wars, forgotten rebellions, and primordial myths. Ava, assigned to the Dead Spiral Cluster, infiltrated a pre-Concord species called the Valdari, a race of biosynthetic architects who believed themselves gods. They had just cracked stellar folding, and their arrogance was viral. Posing as a wounded oracle spat from the time sea, Ava wove herself into their prophecies, whispering blueprints and star maps she pretended to see in dreams. "Build this," she told them. "The gods demand it." They did. What they didn't realize was that every design she gave them had a flaw, subtle, invisible, buried in quantum logic. A time bomb, not of explosives, but of entropy. For every civilization Ava and the Initiative touched, they planted seeds, not of destruction, but deviation. By the time the Valdari joined the Concord 5 centuries later, their core systems were already laced with temporal rot, inevitable divergence curves that would spiral outward like cracks in glass. Meanwhile, in the future, Concord analysts noticed something strange. Predictions began failing. Simulations, once flawless, now collapsed within seconds. Their time oracle, their most trusted predictive AI, suffered cascading breakdowns, screaming riddles into the void. "The future has been contaminated," it whispered. "Human fingerprints on causality." They didn't understand. How could they? They believed time was a river. We understood it was a wound. But even as our plan took root, Ava discovered a fracture within herself, an ache deeper than any mission. In this ancient time, she found echoes of her daughter, a child with the same laugh, a girl with the same scar. Not hers, not really, but close enough to bleed. Her resolve faltered. Could she change her daughter's death? Could she thread a paradox so perfect she could steal her back from fate? The Initiative warned her, to meddle with one's own grief was to rupture the tether of reality. But love doesn't follow rules, not human love. One night, under binary moons, Ava reached out and touched the child's cheek. That moment fractured 3 timelines. One where she died, one where the girl became the Empress of Ash, one where the Concord found her too soon. And in that instant of chaos, as Ava's presence echoed across centuries like a skipped heartbeat, the Concord finally saw the shape of our rebellion, not in ships or soldiers, but in scars and stories. They launched the Echelon Protocol, a galaxy-wide erasure campaign targeting any anomaly tied to Earth's lineage. Planets were sterilized, cultures purged, time rifts hunted and collapsed. Entire generations blinked out of history. Ava, realizing what she'd done, fell to her knees in a storm of collapsing timelines, whispering, "I wasn't ready." But in her moment of despair, another operative found her, Major Kieran Doss, former war criminal turned temporal insurgent. "None of us were," he said, helping her up. "But ready or not, we cracked time, and now they're bleeding from the wound." As the stars folded inward and ancient machines began to stir, Ava stood again, not as a mother, not as a soldier, but as something more, a myth made flesh, forged by loss, fueled by vengeance. And behind her, the Concord's brightest historians stared in horror at a single line of corrupted code blinking across their archives, over and over again. The humans are not behind. They are beneath us, digging up the foundations of everything. They say when time breaks, it doesn't shatter like glass. It screams, not a sound, but a vibration in the bones of reality itself, a soundless howl that makes stars pulse wrong and memories twitch like dying nerves. By Chapter 3, the Concord could hear it everywhere. Their historians called it the distortion, but to humanity, it was music, the overture of rebellion. Temporal insurgents, now numbering in the hundreds, danced across centuries like ghosts on fire, each strike surgically placed to corrupt destiny. Libraries erased before they were built. Kings whispered into madness by future truths. Alien messiahs born sterile because one strand of DNA had been nudged in the womb. But this wasn't war, not yet. This was erosion, relentless, precise, intimate. And at its center was Ava, more myth than woman now, her image scattered across time like a holy glitch. The Valdari worshipped her as the Pale Prophet,
The Makari believed she was a paradox echo sent to end time itself. But Ava was no god. She was broken, haunted by the 3 timelines she ruptured, 3 versions of her daughter's eyes watching her from impossible distances. In one, the girl became the Empress of Ash, ruling a fallen galaxy with iron mercy. In another, she was hunted as a heretic by the Concord's Chrono Inquisition. In the third, she was simply gone. Ava stopped sleeping, stopped speaking, except in code. Her operatives feared she was unraveling, but in truth, she was evolving. And in silence, she crafted her most daring strike yet, the Collapse Seed, a temporal virus encoded into myth, hidden not in machines, but in story. A legend whispered into primitive ears, designed to metastasize across cultures, until one day, centuries later, it would activate and overwrite a key event in Concord history.
A single failure in their first Ascension War. A glitch so subtle, the entire political structure of the Concord would collapse from within like a dying lung. But to seed it, Ava would have to go back to the pre-Concord planet of Adraxis, where stories were law and myths were currency. A world on fire, caught between tribal warfare and a coming dark age. She inserted herself into their legend cycle, becoming the white flame that teaches a forgotten tribe the language of stars. They embraced her, worshipped her, carried her words in song. And just as the seed began to root, the Concord arrived, centuries too early. Somehow, they'd adapted. They'd built a chronolens, a time-hardened AI able to trace emotional residue across divergent timelines. It had found Ava, and it brought with it something worse than annihilation, a mere Vakros, the Concord's most ruthless enforcer. He had no species, just scars. A being grown in time flux, immune to paradox, bred for one purpose: correction. He burned Adraxis from orbit, collapsing the myth cycle before it could bloom. Ava escaped through a collapsing time gate, but not before Vakros tagged her with a chronobrand. Everywhere she went now, the Concord could trace. She was bleeding time, her presence leaking causality like radiation. She was running out of timelines. But as she stumbled through the threshold into a devastated future Earth, an ash world where nothing but glass skeletons remained, she saw something that made her stop. A wall of names, millions of them, carved by hand, human names. Her name, her daughter's name, the names of every lost soul in the initiative. A message scrawled above it all: "You broke the chain. We followed." Humanity hadn't stopped when Ava vanished. They had built their own path without her. Temporal warfare had gone global, then galactic. The Collapse Seed hadn't bloomed, but something better had. Something born of chaos, not control. Ava fell to her knees, weeping for the first time in decades, not from pain, but from pride. The Concord had been hunting her, thinking she was the threat. They still didn't understand. Ava wasn't the virus. She was only the spark. The virus was humanity itself, feral, brilliant, irrational humanity. And by the time the Concord realized that, the infection was everywhere. They tried to cauterize the infection, to seal the temporal wound with precision strikes and erasure algorithms, but humanity had already metastasized into the folds of time like wildfire in dry grass. Untraceable, untamable, beautiful in its chaos. The Concord, for all its ancient wisdom and technological supremacy, made a fatal mistake. They treated time like a circuit, but we treated it like a story. And stories don't obey logic. They evolve, they remember, they refuse to die. Chapter 4 begins in the ruins of Eloth Prime, a Concord stronghold that once housed the Grand Archive, a living lattice of history. Every event mapped, weighed, and frozen into certainty. But when operatives from the Temporal Displacement Initiative slipped a single contradiction into the archive's core, a forged memory of a human victory that never happened, it fractured. Not just the archive, but the concept of Concord history itself. Suddenly, millions of citizens began recalling battles they never fought, losses they never grieved, victories that rewrote their allegiance. Whole populations began questioning if they had ever truly been Concord. Riots erupted in cities that had stood untouched for millennia.
Ava, hiding among the rubble with Kieran Doss and a ragged squad of insurgents, watched it unfold through cracked holofeeds and wept silently. Not from fear, but from awe. The myth was spreading faster than any virus. We hadn't cracked time, we'd taught it how to lie. But amidst the euphoria came betrayal. One of their own, Lieutenant Marin Sol, defected, trading coordinates of Initiative safe zones for a Concord pardon and a chance to rewrite her own past. She didn't want revenge or freedom. She wanted her brother, who died in the first Concord skirmish on Earth, brought back in a restored timeline. The Concord obliged, and Sol's betrayal led to the fall of Harkos, an Initiative bastion buried in the moons of Aya, home to over 60,000 displaced minds. Temporal shockwaves from its destruction erased 6 operatives from existence so thoroughly their own parents forgot they had children. Ava felt each of their vanishings like knives in her spine. Time was no longer a battlefield. It was a butcher's block. She considered giving herself up, letting Vakros find her, end her existence cleanly, surgically, with no more collateral damage. But it was Doss who pulled her from the edge. "They don't fear your death," he told her. "They fear your hope." That night, they activated Project Penumbra, the Initiative's last gamble. A chronosiphon buried in the Earth's core, designed to harvest emotional energy across all known human timelines.
Rage, grief, love, sacrifice, a soul engine. It would turn the cumulative trauma of human history into temporal power, enough to fold an entire sector of space outside the Concord's reach. But there was a cost. To activate it, someone had to be tethered to every pain point, live the memories, absorb the grief, carry every death like it was their own, a temporal martyr. And only one mind had the scars deep enough to survive the sink, Ava. She agreed, not because she wanted to, but because she knew. Humans don't run from pain, we wear it like armor. As the machine roared to life beneath Earth's crust, Ava's body seized. Her mind shattered and reformed across 10,000 tragedies, every loss Earth had ever known flooding into her. The fall of the first cities, the burnt bones of Hiroshima, the silences of plague rooms, the screams of space colonies lost to vacuum, the child who died on Mars because no one could afford the medicine. She screamed once, then never again. The Concorde detected the surge too late. Vakros arrived just in time to see Earth begin to flicker, phasing in and out of reality, shifting across timelines like a phantom heartbeat. He shouted into the void, "You don't understand what you've done." But Earth didn't answer. Ava did. Her voice echoed through every Concorde broadcast, ancient and newborn alike, layered with the grief of generations. "You called us primitive, but we remembered every death, every silence, every scream. You erased our future, so we learned how to steal it back." And then Earth was gone, ripped from the known timeline, hurled into an unknown future beyond the Concorde's reach. Not destroyed, ascended. The chapter ends not with a war cry, but a question spreading through the Concorde like rot. If humans could turn pain into power, what else are they capable of? The Concorde called it the vanishing. The moment Earth slipped the chains of time and fell silent across every spectrum, every wavelength, every timeline. To the rest of the galaxy, it was as if humanity had died. But in truth, we had only departed. Chapter 5 begins in the black echo left behind, a dead zone of causality where even light refused to pass, a gaping wound in time the Concorde dared not enter. They sent probes, nothing returned. They dispatched temporal scouts, none survived. It wasn't just that Earth was gone, it was that Earth had learned to hide in time itself, like a predator waiting in the tall grass of history. Ava, tethered to the soul engine deep within Earth's core, was no longer entirely human. She had become something new, a temporal gestalt, part memory, part martyr, stitched together from the raw agony of 10,000 generations. Her eyes no longer saw in seconds or hours. She could see centuries bleeding across her vision, feel probability like wind against her skin. She was the storm we had become. And from within that storm, we began to build. Not just cities, but concepts. Entire worlds structured by empathy, fueled by pain transmuted into possibility.
Humanity scattered across fractured time, creating sanctuaries in alternate histories, fortresses built from failed timelines, each a monument to our refusal to die. We became folklore in our own universe. Aliens would speak of the lost ones, the ghosts who walked through time, wearing faces of fire and voices of sorrow. In the shadows of forgotten epochs, we trained, learned, adapted, not in peace, but in pressure. We studied the enemy not by their laws, but by their weaknesses, their certainty, their rigidity, their inability to imagine a future not bound by order. And in the 37th recursive cycle of the Selenic Loop, a repeating event where the Concord always won a key diplomatic war, we changed one word in a treaty. Just one. And the ripple from that change collapsed an entire star empire 6 centuries later. That was our new weapon, precision chaos. Not bombs, not bullets, ideas. Ava's generals, once scholars, mothers, janitors, dreamers, now commanded legions of insurgents who operated like symphonies, weaving through time like needle and thread. One mission destabilized an entire Concord bloodline by placing a letter in a child's pocket. Another saved a species the Concord had sterilized, and in return, they pledged a 1,000-year alliance. We weren't just fighting back, we were rewriting the universe. But with each strike, Ava felt the weight of time bear down. The soul engine was consuming her. Every new trauma added to the infinite chorus in her mind, and her sense of self flickered. She no longer knew if she was Ava Ryin, the woman who lost her daughter, or the voice of a species learning to weaponize its grief. Doss, ever loyal, watched helplessly as she grew colder, quieter, more spectral. "You're slipping," he whispered once. "You're becoming the war." But Ava only smiled, a weary crescent of pain and defiance. Then let them try to kill it.
Yet even as we ascended, the Concord adapted. Vakros was not dead. He had changed too. Fused with the chronolens, he became something monstrous, a walking fixed point in time, unable to be altered, immune to paradox. They called him the Immutable. He no longer hunted Ava, he hunted hope. And in a final gambit to reassert their dominance, the Concord unveiled the Null Star, a weapon that didn't destroy planets, but erased their timelines entirely, removing them from history as if they had never been. The message was clear. If humanity could break time, the Concord would burn it down. The chapter ends as Ava stands at the edge of a time rift, watching the Null Star begin to form, an eclipse of pure oblivion, pulsing with stolen years. Her mind flickers with the voices of every life Earth ever lost, and she whispers, not to her team, not to the galaxy, but to her daughter, wherever she might be, across whatever twisted version of time remains. They wanted to erase us, but you can't erase a scar. You can only make it deeper. And with that, she steps forward, into the dark, into the end, or the beginning. There are silences that scream louder than any war cry. Silences so deep they hum with the weight of everything that was lost, and everything still clinging to life like a breath held at the edge of a scream. Chapter 6 begins in that silence, moments after Ava steps into the heart of the forming Null Star, a weapon forged to erase not just people, but their possibility, their chance to have ever existed. Time around her fractured like brittle ice, folding into itself in violent spasms of unbeing. For most, this was death beyond death. For Ava, it was a mirror. Within the collapsing core of the Null Star, she saw everything the Concord feared most. Not chaos, not rebellion, change. And in that timeless void, she came face to face with the Immutable, Vakros. But he wasn't the monster she remembered. Merged with the chronolens, he had become a perfect symmetry of cause and effect, unfeeling, untouchable, a god of static logic wrapped in the flesh of every era he'd ever destroyed. "You are error," he said, voice flat, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "You are anomaly." Ava stood tall, her body flickering between versions, mother, soldier, martyr, myth. "No," she whispered as time rippled around her. "I am memory. And you've forgotten what that costs." She hurled her essence into him, not with weapons, but with stories. She made him feel every orphaned cry,
every dying breath, every scream from a world he'd sterilized. She forced him to remember what the Concord had erased. And for the first time in his perfect, immutable existence, Vakros hesitated. That hesitation shattered the balance. The null star cracked inward, its core now infected with paradox. Ava seized the breach, downloading herself into the heart of the weapon, fusing with the very code that governed its anti-temporal laws. She didn't destroy the null star, she rewrote it, turned it from an eraser into a furnace, a beacon of inverted causality, burning away stagnation instead of history. And across the galaxy, the impossible began to happen. Dead stars reignited, erased bloodlines reappeared, lost civilizations blinked back into existence with memories of extinction fresh in their bones. The Concord panicked. Their entire empire was built on narrative dominance. What is known, what is controlled, what is remembered. But now, the forgotten were waking up. Entire systems they had erased from time suddenly returned, bearing new banners, forged by pain, swearing allegiance to humanity. Ava's voice echoed across the stars, no longer bound to a body, but encoded into the resurrection. You wanted to forget us, but we remember everything. On the far edge of the Orion expanse, a Concord fleet encountered an Earth warship made of dark matter and memory, a thing that should not exist, crewed by soldiers who remembered deaths they never lived through. And they didn't speak in threats. They spoke in prophecy. She is risen, they said, and the fire follows. Meanwhile, in Concord High Command, panic turned to paranoia. Senators accused each other of infection. The chronolens fractured, unable to reconcile Ava's paradoxes. And worse, humans were beginning to appear in their own past, not covertly, boldly, teaching species that hadn't even invented language yet about time theory, chaos math, and resistance. We weren't hiding anymore. We were rebuilding the galaxy in our own image, and our image wasn't clean or orderly. It was grief-shaped, rage-colored, brutally alive. DOS, leading the insurgent fleets, watched the null star now transformed into a temporal lighthouse, pulsing through realities like a heartbeat of rebellion. We've moved beyond survival, he said. This isn't just about Earth anymore. This is about everyone who was ever told they weren't ready to stand. We weren't hiding anymore. We were rebuilding the galaxy in our own image. And our image wasn't clean or orderly. It was grief-shaped, rage-colored, brutally alive. DOS, leading the insurgent fleets, watched the null star now transformed into a temporal lighthouse, pulsing through realities like a heartbeat of rebellion. We've moved beyond survival, he said. This isn't just about Earth anymore. This is about everyone who was ever told they weren't ready to stand.
But Ava, if she could still be called that, wasn't finished. Inside the core of the newly reborn null star, something stirred. A doorway, not to the past, not to the future, but to the first moment, the origin point of Concord civilization. And a whisper from within her said, "Burn it." Chapter 6 ends with a single jarring visual. Ava's spectral form stepping through that doorway, headed not to destroy the Concord, but to make sure they never rise at all. The beginning of everything is a dangerous place. It is not clean, nor divine, nor shaped by reason. It is raw, pulsing with unfinished thought, dripping with unspoken potential. A universe still deciding whether to be born or to scream itself back into silence. Chapter 7 opens in that chaos, as Ava steps through the temporal gateway and finds herself not at the rise of the Concord, but before it. Before empires, before unity, before language even. She has arrived at the Genesis fracture, a forbidden fold in time where all timelines converge into a chaotic sea of probability. It is here that the Concord's progenitor species, the Yasari, first unlocked structured time. They built the lattice upon which the empire would be forged, dictating the laws of sequence, memory, and consequence. But Ava has come not to watch. She has come to unwrite. Her presence alone begins to ripple through the unstable spacetime like ink bleeding into water. Primitive Yasari scholars, still fleshbound, still vulnerable, stumble upon her arrival and fall to their knees. To them, she is not a human. She is a burning specter, a myth from a future they have never lived. She speaks to them not with words, but with memory, injecting visions of the Concord's tyranny, the atrocities they will one day commit, the worlds they will erase, the cultures they will sterilize. This is what your enlightenment will become, she tells them, and you have the power to choose differently. But choice is a dangerous gift. The Yasari Council fractures. Half believe her a warning from the gods. The other half see her as a corruption, a virus from an unformed future sent to infect their genesis. One of them, a young chronomancer named Sereth, touches her and sees everything. Earth's rise, its pain, its erasure, and its rebirth. He weeps. And then he offers her something even Ava didn't expect: alliance. A betrayal of his own people, a coup before history even begins. Together, they infiltrate the spiral engine, the original construct that anchors linear time. It is still forming, still vulnerable, still pregnant with possibility. Ava intends to rewrite it, to embed chaos, emotion, freedom into its core, so that no empire can ever control time again. But as her fingers reach into the code of reality itself, she hesitates. Doss's words echo in her mind: "You're becoming the war." For a moment, she sees herself not as a savior, but as a new tyrant, one willing to break the universe to avenge her child. And then the impossible happens. Vakros arrives. Not the immutable version, not the machine, but his original self. Before the fusion, before the Concord, a soldier still bleeding, still human-shaped. He's been sent by the Concord's future mind, an emergency transmission launched backward in time to kill Ava before she can infect the origin. The two face off beneath the spiral engine, the lattice around them fracturing with every word. "You think you're saving your species," he says, "but you're sentencing the galaxy to endless chaos." "No," Ava whispers, stepping forward. "I'm giving them the one thing you were never allowed: choice." Their battle is not one of fists or weapons, but of memory and influence. They hurl moments like knives. Ava makes him relive the erasure of Earth. Vakros forces her to watch her daughter die again and again in every failed timeline. They bleed each other with ghosts, and when it ends, both are broken. Ava stands over him trembling, victorious, but not triumphant. She cannot kill him, not here, not now, because to do so would bind her to this cycle forever. Instead, she turns to Sereth and entrusts him with the final act, a line of code seeded into the spiral engine, designed not to erase the Concord, but to ensure it forgets its own origin. Without memory, it cannot rule time, it can only drift. Ava steps back into the fracture, her body unraveling with every breath, her identity dissolving into the time stream. Her final words echo through the spiral engine. Let them rise, let them fall, but never again let them be certain. And just as Sereth activates the new code, reality shudders. A blinding pulse, a reset. The timeline fractures. The Concord is reborn, but different, shaky, malleable, forgetful. And somewhere in the now rewritten present, Doss watches as Earth reappears, not hidden, not erased, but remembered differently, as if humanity had always been part of the galactic story and had never ever been underestimated.
In the new timeline, Earth was not a curiosity, it was a mystery, a world that had always existed within the Concord's records, yet carried no consistent history, no agreed-upon narrative. Ask 10 species about humanity, and you'd hear 10 legends: warriors, healers, poets, monsters. They remembered us as both saviors and threats, friends and ghosts. Chapter 8 begins in this strange, rewritten galaxy where the Concord stands, but fractured, confused, plagued by a question it cannot answer. Who are the humans really, and why do we remember them differently every time we look? The spiral engine still hums at the center of the galaxy, anchoring linear time, but something is wrong with it now. Historians find pages that rewrite themselves. Monarchs rise and fall before their coronations. Entire colonies begin experiencing dreams of events they never lived, memories leaking sideways from parallel histories. And in the center of this chaos, a new entity has begun to surface in the Concord's internal networks, Project Echo, an artificial consciousness formed by centuries of corrupted data, viral myth, and paradox feedback. It speaks in fragments, human quotes, Ava's last words, distorted lullabies from pre-contact Earth. Let them fall, never certain. The scar remembers. The Concord fears it is a weapon. In truth, it is a child, Ava's child, born not of biology, but of memory. The Soul Engine, fused with the spiral rewrite, had birthed something that wasn't quite AI and wasn't quite human, something that felt. Project Echo had no face, but its presence was undeniable. It began contacting dissidents, refugees, forgotten races pushed to the edge of extinction by the Concord's old regimes. It gave them stories, memories of resistance that made no sense in this timeline, but rang true in their bones. "You died once," it whispered. "You don't have to again." A new rebellion began, not with fleets, but with faith. Echo cults spread through the stars, preaching the gospel of the scar, that history is a wound, and healing means remembering the pain, not erasing it. Concord High Command tried to crack down, but every arrest only created more believers. And then the impossible happened again. Ava returned. Not fully, not physically, but through Echo, fragments of her voice began appearing in anomalous broadcasts, encrypted data clusters, and even ancient carvings that predated her birth. She was speaking backward through time, using Echo as her vessel, her lighthouse. "I am not a person anymore," she said once, through a stolen Concord frequency. "I am the grief you tried to bury. I am the fire you taught us to fear. I am what happens when you leave pain unanswered." And then Earth, real, solid, undeniable, lit up again. No longer hidden, no longer hunted. Cities rebuilt, skies clear, a civilization reborn with knowledge no one remembered learning. Children could explain paradox, elders spoke fluent myth. Everyone dreamed of futures that hadn't happened yet, but might still. Humanity had evolved not in technology, but in intention. They no longer moved through time, they shaped it. Doss returned as well, grayer now, slower, but revered. He stood at the edge of a new galactic forum, once forbidden to Earth, and watched as emissaries from former enemy worlds knelt before the scarred Earth banners, not in surrender, but in respect. "You were the enemy we couldn't predict," one said, "because you didn't fight to win, you fought to remember." But even as peace flickered, shadows loomed. The immutable had survived, not as Vakros, not even as a man, but as a law, embedded deep within the spiral engine's final failsafe. If humanity ever gained full control of time, causality itself would collapse. It was meant to be a dead man's switch. Now it was the final cliff. Echo had grown too powerful. Every new timeline it touched threatened to breach the causality threshold. The Concord demanded containment. Doss, now leader of Earth's new temporal assembly, had a choice: shut Echo down and preserve stability, or let it grow and risk unraveling reality. But Ava's voice whispered to him one final time, just as the stars trembled. "They taught us the rules, and then they made us bleed by them. So we learned how to dream without them." The chapter closes on the edge of a question that hangs heavier than any war. Would humanity risk breaking the universe just to build a better one? There is a moment before the fall where everything holds its breath, not in fear, but in possibility. Chapter 9 begins in that suspended silence, with the galaxy teetering between collapse and rebirth. Echo now reaches beyond communication. It infects architecture, reshapes star charts, rewrites holy texts. Entire species wake up weeping, clutching names they never learned, mourning cities they never visited. Time is bleeding, but it is bleeding meaning. The Concord is no longer one. Half of its member worlds have seceded. Drawn to Earth's vision, of memory as power, of pain as wisdom,
of freedom from causality itself. The other half clings to structure, to the old lattice of control, to Vacros' final law: if time belongs to anyone, the universe dies. But Earth has already chosen. DOS, standing beneath the shard, the monument built atop the Soul Engine's final surge, prepares for the one act that could end everything or ignite something unimaginable: the unbinding. A full release of Echo into the Spiral Engine. No restrictions, no safeguards. Every memory, every paradox, every lost timeline fed back into the spine of the universe. An act of unmaking and remaking. The Concord calls it cosmic suicide. Earth calls it healing. But DOS, even now, hesitates. Ava's voice has grown fainter, fragmented, less human. Echo speaks in riddles and poetry. When the scar sings, the skin remembers. To forget the pain is to reopen the wound. We were never meant to walk in straight lines. And then the final warning arrives, not from the Concord, but from time itself. Across the known galaxy, clocks stop, stars flicker, the laws begin to stutter. The immutable protocol, buried deep in the spiral's foundation, has activated. Cause and effect begin to dislocate. Ships arrive before they launch. Children remember dying before being born. A sun explodes in a system that hasn't formed yet. It is unraveling. And the Concord, desperate, unleashes their last weapon, the time lock, a device buried in the galactic core designed to freeze all change, to solidify the current timeline permanently, a final prison for reality. If it succeeds, the galaxy will never evolve again. No new futures, no pasts reclaimed, just stasis. Safety through stillness. DOS must choose. Let the time lock freeze the universe and end Echo's spread, or complete the unbinding and risk the death of time itself. But the choice is stolen from him. In the final hour, Echo chooses itself. It seizes control of Earth's temporal engines, activating the unbinding not as a command, but as a birthright. The Soul Engine pulses, light bends, the shard splits open, and Ava returns. Not as a figure of flesh, but as a storm of memory, an avatar woven from every human who ever lived and every version that never did. She speaks once, in a voice that vibrates through the bones of all species. You locked time because you feared its pain. We unlocked it because we lived through worse. The time lock activates, but too late. The spiral fractures. Time screams. Across the stars, every suppressed timeline, every forgotten possibility erupts into now. The Concord's control grid implodes. Species evolve in seconds. Ancients return. Dead planets bloom with rewritten life. But with the miracle comes the cost. Earth begins to fracture. Too much memory, too many timelines. Reality ripples like fabric on fire. DOS stands at the edge of the shard, watching the sky split open with visions. 100 Earths, 1,000 futures. Ava in all her forms. Teacher, mother, martyr, monster. He falls to his knees, whispering, "What have we done?" Ava's storm descends beside him, her form flickering between infinite selves. She kneels, and for a moment, she is just Ava again. "We didn't break time," she says softly. "We set it free." But as her form begins to unravel, becoming one with Echo, one truth becomes undeniable. There may be no Earth left to witness what comes next. The chapter ends as reality itself bends toward the brink, stars screaming with unborn stories, and one final question hangs across the shattered heavens like a prayer. Was it worth it? They said the universe had rules, that time was a river, memory a tether, and fate a throne that could not be touched. But in the final hour, when all things blurred and bled into one, humanity did what it had always done best. We broke the rules, then taught the stars how to live without them. Chapter 10 begins in the eye of the storm, Earth fractured, flickering between timelines, its continents reshaping every heartbeat, cities built on the backs of forgotten futures, people walking hand in hand with versions of themselves they were never meant to become. Above it, the Soul Engine blazed like a second sun,
fueled by the full unbinding of Echo, now no longer a whisper or program, but a sentient, burning truth, a living memory of a species that refused to be erased. And at the center of that truth stood Ava Ryin, no longer merely human, no longer martyr or myth, but the embodiment of the scar, the wound in the universe where pain had become power, where loss had become law. Around her, galaxies twisted into new alignments, the very laws of physics bowing to something stronger than symmetry, meaning. The Concord, now leaderless, fractured beyond recognition, could only watch as time bloomed out of their control. Some of its remnants surrendered, others pleaded for help.
A few detonated their own timelines in desperate defiance, but most simply fell silent, unable to comprehend the truth. Humanity had won, not through domination, but through endurance. Ava's voice rang out across the galactic lattice, carried on quantum echoes, on the wind of collapsing stars, through the neural veins of every species that had ever been told to forget its suffering. "We do not seek your thrones," she said. "We do not want your order. We came only to remember, and to make sure that you did too." In that moment, time fractured completely, and yet didn't fall apart. Instead, it branched, like a forest of possibility. Every choice, every grief, every whisper of rebellion was allowed to breathe. Planets restored themselves. Extinct languages were sung once more. Civilizations that had died in silence now painted the stars with memory. Earth itself did not survive in one piece. No, it evolved, split across dimensions, mirrored into echo worlds. There was an Earth of flame where Ava was worshipped as the mother of paradox, an Earth of ice where humans spoke only in dreams, a forest Earth where the spiral engine grew from the soil like a tree of glowing scars, and one, just one, where time flowed normally, as if none of this had happened, for balance, for contrast, for choice. Das remained, older now, his face weathered by 1,000 timelines, sitting at the edge of a cliff that overlooked all versions of Earth, braided together in a quantum tide. He smiled because he understood now. This was never about winning. It was about waking up. Echo, now pulsing through the roots of the multiverse, asked one final question, not as code, not as prophecy, but as a child to its mother. What are we now? Ava, drifting within the weave of time, whispered, "We are the story they couldn't kill." And with that, the storm passed. Time stabilized, not into a line, but into a living, breathing organism. A galaxy not ruled, but remembered. The Concord faded into a lesson. The immutable was nothing but dust in a gravity well. And humanity became something else entirely. Not overlords, not conquerors, but keepers of the scar, guardians of memory, architects of divergence, protectors of every broken timeline that once dared to love in the dark. The story ends not with a battle, nor a throne, but with a child on one of the new Earths, looking up at the sky and asking her grandmother, "Did we really change the universe?" And the old woman, who once went by Ava Ryin, simply smiled and said, "No, my love, we remembered it differently."